Picture this. Senior U.S. diplomats wake up one morning to discover their own president has appointed a special envoy to acquire Greenland, and they had absolutely no idea it was coming. Not a briefing, not a heads up, nothing. This isn't a thriller novel. This happened 2 weeks ago, and what unfolded next reveals a shocking pattern in how American foreign policy is actually being made right now. One that has lawmakers from both parties warning about impeachment and allies questioning if America can be trusted anymore. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you changes everything you thought you knew about how the White House operates. I'm going to walk you through the most revealing foreign policy crisis of 2025 so far, Trump's attempt to acquire Greenland. But this isn't just about an island in the Arctic. This is about a fundamental shift in how American foreign policy gets made, who makes it, and why some of the most experienced national security officials in Washington are being completely cut out of decisions that could reshape global alliances. By the end of this breakdown, you'll understand 3 critical things. First, the exact timeline of how Trump's Greenland strategy evolved from quiet diplomacy to international crisis in less than 2 weeks. Second, the centralized decision-making pattern that's now defining Trump's second term, from Greenland to Ukraine to Syria. And third, why foreign policy experts are saying the damage to U.S. credibility may already be permanent, regardless of whether Trump actually acquires Greenland or not. Everything I'm sharing comes directly from a Reuters investigation published January 24, 2026, based on interviews with multiple officials familiar with these events. Let's start with what actually happened. The December meeting in Nuuk last month, officials from 3 governments met in Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. The United States, Denmark, and Greenland sent representatives for what sources described as a reassuringly normal session. Here's what's critical. There was no discussion of a U.S. military takeover. No talk of a financial acquisition of the Danish territory. It was standard diplomatic business. Everyone left that meeting with the same understanding. This was routine Arctic cooperation, the kind of meeting that happens regularly between allies. Then everything changed. Less than 2 weeks later, Trump made an announcement that stunned Copenhagen and, crucially, blindsided senior U.S. officials across his own administration who work on European and NATO issues. He appointed Jeff Landry as special envoy to Greenland. Landry immediately posted on social media that he would help make Greenland part of the U.S. Let that sink in. Senior American diplomats who specialize in European relations and NATO, people whose entire careers are built around managing these exact relationships, learned about this the same way you probably did, through the news and social media. What this reveals, this wasn't an oversight, this wasn't a communication breakdown, this was the pattern. And according to Reuters' sources, it fits exactly how Trump's foreign policy making operates. The moves that followed, an implied threat to seize Greenland, a plan for new tariffs on U.S. allies, a push to extract concessions from Denmark, none of it went through the normal channels of national security review. Instead, these decisions appeared to be driven solely by Trump and a small group of close aides, the inner circle. According to Reuters reporting this week, Trump's Greenland strategy involved a very specific group. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick proposed the idea of using tariffs as leverage. Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and other close aides tried to steer Trump away from considering military force. Notice who's missing from that list. The career diplomats at the State Department who spend their lives managing relationships with NATO allies. The National Security Council experts who wargame the consequences of threatening military action against a NATO member's territory. The Pentagon officials who understand what military options actually means in practice. Why Trump operates this way. Here's what the White House says about this approach. Spokeswoman Anna Kelly told Reuters that people who leaked to Reuters weren't clued in on sensitive discussions, and that Trump's national security team's achievements speak for themselves. She added, "The president was elected to implement America First foreign policy, and he has done so more effectively through his top-down approach. In many ways, this approach works for Trump. He's suspicious of the Washington bureaucracy. He wants his decisions implemented quickly, without what he sees as obstruction from career officials. But here's the problem that emerged over the past few weeks. The cost of centralization. Sudden announcements, surprise reversals, confusion among allies and even among U.S. lawmakers. All of this flows from centralized decision-making, and according to foreign policy experts, it risks lasting damage to relations with key U.S. allies. Corey Shake, a former Pentagon and White House official, now with the American Enterprise Institute, put it bluntly. Trump is so erratic with his threats, there's no way to establish that he won't turn right around and do it again. He has made the United States untrustworthy to our closest friends. The CNN interview that escalated everything. On January 5th, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller appeared on CNN. This was 3 days after a U.S. military operation in Venezuela. The interviewer asked Miller directly, would the White House rule out military action to acquire Greenland? Miller declined to answer directly. That non-answer ignited transatlantic fury. Doubling down, Trump and other officials in his administration then appeared to double down on the possibility that the U.S. could use force in Greenland. They did this in interviews and on social media. The result? Confusion and alarm in Washington and among U.S. allies. Capitol Hill responds. On Capitol Hill, something unusual happened. Democrats and Republicans both grew anxious. Why? The administration appeared to be moving forward with a major military operation without consulting Congress first. Think about what that means. Lawmakers from both parties saw the same pattern. Major military decisions made without congressional input. It had happened before. It looked like it was happening again. Lawmakers phoned Secretary of State Marco Rubio and senior White House officials. They laid out their concerns and advised the administration not to move forward. Here's where it gets even more serious. Some Republican lawmakers, Trump's own party, told administration officials that they feared a potential impeachment investigation over any military invasion of Greenland. Let me repeat that. Republicans were warning about impeachment over Greenland. The reality behind the threats. According to two sources close to the administration, military action was never seriously considered. But here's the critical point. It doesn't matter that it wasn't seriously considered internally if everyone externally, allies, lawmakers, the public, believes it might be. The threat itself is the damage. The walkback. This week, Trump brought down the tension. He withdrew his threat to impose tariffs on allies supporting Greenland. He said he had reached the outlines of a deal with NATO on the island's future. Trump stated he and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte had formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region during talks in Davos, Switzerland. White House spokeswoman Kelly said, "If this deal goes through, the United States will be achieving all of its strategic goals with respect to Greenland at very little cost, forever." This isn't just about Greenland. Trump's practice of centralizing foreign policy decisions, relying on trusted aides, and effectively sidelining experts has been a consistent theme of his second term. Let me show you how this pattern has played out in two other critical situations. Ukraine, the 28-point plan. In the fall, a 28-point plan to end Russia's war in Ukraine emerged from meetings, but these weren't normal diplomatic meetings. The plan came from discussions between Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, his son-in-law Jared Kushner, and Kirill Dmitriev, a Russian envoy who heads the Russian Direct Investment Fund, one of Russia's largest sovereign wealth funds. Many senior U.S. officials inside the State Department and on the National Security Council would typically be in the know about the evolution of such a plan. They weren't briefed on the process. Think about what that means. A plan to end a major European war, one that involves NATO security, nuclear weapons, and the future of the international order, was developed without the input of the people whose job it is to understand those exact issues. Syria. The sanctions surprise. In May, Trump met with Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara in Saudi Arabia. The meeting was public, in front of cameras. By meeting with him this way, Trump effectively granted U.S. support to the former Islamist militant, even as some in his administration had advised against it. Then Trump decided to lift all U.S. sanctions on Syria. This decision caught many U.S. officials off guard. They learned about it after the fact. Since then, U.S. envoy Tom Barrack has been the main implementer of Syria policy. Officials at the State Department and other parts of the administration have had little room to make policy suggestions, according to 3 sources familiar with the process. Communications between Barrack and the subject matter experts in Washington have not been frequent. The State Department's response. When asked about this, a State Department spokesperson said, "There is tremendous collaboration throughout President Trump's administration, and there are dedicated public servants dutifully advancing key priorities. Then there are the anonymous sources whining to the press who clearly don't have the judgment or temperament to implement President Trump's agenda." Why Greenland matters. Trump and his backers insist the U.S. needs Greenland to fend off threats from Russia and China in the Arctic. They argue that Denmark cannot ensure the island's security. Is there truth to this? Let's look at the facts. What the U.S. already has. The United States already has a base on Greenland. Thule Air Base, now called Pituffik Space Base. It's been there since the Cold War. More importantly, the U.S. has the ability to expand its presence there under a 1951 treaty with Denmark. So the strategic access Trump says he needs? The U.S. already has it through existing agreements with a NATO ally. The real debate. The question isn't whether the U.S. needs an Arctic presence. It's whether threatening to seize territory from a NATO ally, even if that threat isn't serious, serves American strategic interests. Does it make the U.S. more secure if Denmark, a founding NATO member, can't trust American intentions? Does it strengthen the alliance against Russia and China if European allies start questioning whether the U.S. will respect their sovereignty? These are the questions foreign policy experts say should have been worked through before any public threats were made. What you need to understand. Let me give you 4 clear takeaways from this entire situation. First, pattern recognition. This centralized, top-down approach to foreign policy isn't unique to Greenland. Watch for it in every major foreign policy announcement going forward. Ask yourself, did this go through normal diplomatic channels, or did it emerge suddenly from the inner circle? Second, the trust question. The damage to U.S. credibility isn't theoretical. When Republican lawmakers warn their own administration about impeachment, when NATO allies publicly question U.S. intentions, when senior diplomats are blindsided by their own government's positions, that's a trust crisis. Trust takes years to build and moments to destroy. Even if a Greenland deal materializes, the question of whether America's word can be trusted on other issues remains. Third, the bureaucracy debate. There's a legitimate debate here about the role of the foreign policy bureaucracy. Trump supporters argue the deep state obstructs elected leaders. Critics argue expertise and institutional knowledge prevent catastrophic mistakes. Where you stand on that debate will shape how you view these events. But regardless of your position, the consequences of the chosen approach are becoming clear. Fourth, the Landry appointment. Watch what Special Envoy Jeff Landry actually does. His appointment was the spark that ignited this crisis. His office didn't respond to Reuters' request for comment. How he operates, whether he coordinates with State Department officials, and what results he produces will tell us whether this approach can actually work. What happens next? Trump says he has the framework of a deal with NATO on Greenland. If that's true, we should see concrete details soon. If those details don't materialize, or if the approach changes again suddenly, that will tell us something important about the durability of this foreign policy strategy. Denmark's embassy declined to comment for the Reuters story. That silence is significant. Our closest allies are being careful about what they say publicly. That's not normal. Here's what we know for certain. U.S. foreign policy is being made by a very small group around the president. Career experts are being sidelined. Allies are confused and concerned. Lawmakers from both parties are alarmed. Whether this approach succeeds or fails will define not just Trump's second term, but America's position in the world for years to come. The Greenland situation isn't over. It's just getting started, and how it resolves will set the pattern for every foreign policy challenge that follows. Stay informed. Watch what happens next. And remember, when it comes to international relations, how decisions get made matters just as much as what decisions get made.